Have you ever felt the weight of an unseen chain wrapped around your soul? Not the kind that binds the hands or the feet, but one that coils around the heart, tightening with every interaction, every conversation, every lingering moment in the presence of someone who subtly drains the light from your spirit. It is a burden not easily named, yet deeply felt at quiet, knowing that whispers in the stillness of your soul, something is not right here. You see, there are people who enter our lives like the morning sun, illuminating our path, warming our spirits, and guiding us toward growth. And then there are others, some soft-spoken, some charming, some even well-meaning, who pull us ever so slightly away from the divine purpose set before us. They do not come with daggers or destruction, for that would make them too easy to recognize. No, their presence is far more subtle, far more deceptive. A negative word here, a discouraging glance there, a pattern of behavior that sows confusion rather than clarity. At first it seems harmless. Then it becomes familiar. Eventually it begins to feel normal. But there is nothing normal about being dimmed, nothing natural about being slowly pulled away from the presence of God, nothing righteous about staying bound to someone who keeps you from becoming the person you were created to be. God is not a God of confusion. He does not plant dreams in your heart only to watch them wither under the shadow of those who do not belong in your life. He does not call you forward only to leave you entangled in relationships that hinder your growth. And He certainly does not desire for you to remain connected to people whose influence poisons rather than purifies. And yet, how often do we cling to what was meant to be released? How often do we justify staying in the presence of those who diminish us? They are not that bad, we tell ourselves. Perhaps I am overreacting. Maybe if I try harder, they will change. But here is the hard truth: when God begins to remove someone from your life, the more you resist, the heavier your spirit will become. Perhaps you have felt it, the growing unrest deep in your soul, that discomfort in certain conversations, that exhaustion after spending time with a particular person, that quiet voice nudging you, warning you, pleading with you to step away. That is not mere intuition. That is not just a passing thought. That is the voice of God calling you towards something greater. And yet, letting go is never easy. The human heart clings, even to that which causes pain. We build attachments. We make excuses. We convince ourselves that we must endure, must fight for relationships that God Himself is trying to sever. We fear the silence that follows their departure, the emptiness their absence might bring. But here this God never takes without purpose. When He removes, He restores. When He closes a door, He is already preparing to open another. Consider this: would you cling to a withering branch, knowing that a storm is coming? Would you hold tightly to a rope fraying at its core, knowing it cannot bear your weight much longer? Then why do we insist on holding on to relationships that God is loosening? It is time to wake up, time to listen, time to surrender to the still, small voice that has been speaking all along. Because when God wants you to distance yourself from someone, He will not shout. He will not force. He will simply allow the discomfort to grow until you can no longer ignore it. And if you are wondering whether this message is for you, if something in your spirit is stirring, if a face or a name has come to mind as you listen, then, my friend, it is time to pay attention. Because when God speaks, it is not by accident. Now, how do you recognize when God is calling you to step away? Let us look at 7 signs that God wants you to distance yourself from someone who is holding you back. They pull you away from your faith rather than draw you closer to God. Not every person in your life is sent by God. Some come as a distraction, others come as a test, and some come as a direct hindrance to your spiritual walk, pulling you away from the presence of God without you even realizing it. The enemy is clever. He does not always destroy with a storm. Sometimes he whispers through the wrong people, planting seeds of doubt, temptation, and compromise until your faith is no longer what it once was. Think about the people in your life right now. Do they encourage you to pray, or do they scoff at the idea? Do they respect your commitment to righteousness, or do they mock it? Do they strengthen your relationship with God, or do they place obstacles between you and Him? The Bible is clear. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. 1 Corinthians 15:33. It does not say might corrupt. It does not say sometimes corrupt. It says it corrupts without exception. If you surround yourself with people who do not honor God, their influence will eventually seep into your soul. You might tell yourself, but I am strong. I can handle it. I will not change. But look at Samson, gifted by God, chosen for a divine purpose, yet deceived and weakened by the very person he trusted. Look at Solomon, given wisdom beyond measure, yet led astray by relationships that did not honor God. If even the greatest men of faith were not immune, what makes us believe we are? The people closest to you shape the condition of your heart. If they dismiss the things of God, if they encourage you to compromise, if they laugh at righteousness, then, my friend, you are standing in dangerous territory. You may not see the damage right away. It happens slowly, like a small leak in a boat, unnoticed at first, but eventually sinking the entire vessel. And yet some of us hold on, refusing to let go of people who are actively pulling us away from God's plan for our lives. Why? Because we fear loneliness more than we fear spiritual destruction. Because we have convinced ourselves that we can change them rather than recognizing that they are changing us. But let me ask you, if God removed someone from your life, would you chase after them? If He closed a door, would you stand there banging, demanding it to open again? The truth is, when God tells you to step away from someone, it is not punishment, it is protection. He sees what you do not. He knows what you cannot. And He is calling you to trust Him enough to let go. So take a moment and reflect. Has your faith grown stronger or weaker because of this person? Have your prayers become more consistent or more distant? Have you drawn closer to God, or have you quietly started drifting away? If your soul is uneasy, if your spirit is heavy, if something inside you is resisting this message, it is not by accident. It is God's voice nudging you, urging you, pleading with you to listen. Because He will not compete for your attention. If you do not remove yourself from what is pulling you away, eventually you will find yourself too far to return. You feel drained, heavy, or uneasy after spending time with them. There is a weight that cannot be seen but is deeply felt, a heaviness that lingers after certain conversations, a drain on your spirit that no amount of rest can fix. And yet many of us ignore these warnings, dismissing them as mere emotion rather than what they truly are, a spiritual signal that something is off. Have you ever noticed how you feel after spending time with someone? Some people leave you refreshed, inspired, and full of life. Others leave you exhausted, depleted, and uneasy. This is not by chance. There is a reason why Jesus Himself was intentional about who He spent time with. He loved all. But He did not walk closely with all. He withdrew from the crowds. He distanced Himself from those who only took but never poured back into Him. And you must do the same. God did not create you to carry burdens that were never yours to bear. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. But how can you find rest when you continue allowing people into your life who drain you of peace? Think of Jonah. The men on the ship did nothing wrong, yet their lives were thrown into chaos because they were connected to someone who was running from God. Could it be that your storms are not yours, but the result of who you are connected to? Could it be that your spirit is heavy not because of what you have done, but because you are carrying the weight of someone else's rebellion? You were never meant to endure that kind of exhaustion, and yet many of us do. We tolerate relationships that leave us spiritually weak. We ignore the discomfort, thinking it is just a phase. We convince ourselves that it will get better, all the while growing more and more depleted. But here's the hard truth: God is not in relationships that drain your soul. He is not in connections that steal your peace. He is not in friendships that pull you further from Him rather than closer. And if you keep ignoring the signs, eventually your heart will harden to the very voice trying to protect you. So ask yourself, do you feel lighter or heavier after spending time with them? Does your spirit rejoice in their presence, or does it feel burdened? God does not speak with confusion. If you feel uneasy, if your soul is heavy, if you find yourself constantly drained, it is time to step back and listen. Because when God wants you to move, He will not always shout. Sometimes He will simply remove His peace, leaving you with nothing but the weight of what you refuse to let go of. They constantly discourage your growth, your dreams, or your divine purpose. God has placed a calling on your life, a purpose that is unique to you, written in the fabric of your soul before you ever took your first breath. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope, Jeremiah 29:11. But what happens when someone in your life speaks against those plans? What happens when every step forward is met with doubt, negativity, or resistance? Many people are unaware that the enemy does not always attack with outright destruction. Sometimes he works through voices that plant fear, that speak against your calling, that make you second-guess the very purpose God has placed within you. You are not capable. You will fail. This is not for you. These words may not always be spoken directly, but they are felt. The sighs of doubt, the passive remarks, the absence of encouragement, these are all weapons in disguise. But the question is, who are you listening to? Joseph had a dream, a vision from God Himself. Yet the very people closest to him, his own brothers, did not celebrate it. Instead, they were threatened by it, jealous of it, and sought to destroy it. They threw him into a pit, thinking they had silenced his calling. But what they did not understand was that no human hand can cancel what God has ordained. Now, let me ask you, who in your life discourages what God has placed in your heart? Who belittles your ambition? Who makes you feel small for dreaming big? Sometimes the people closest to you will not support what God is doing in your life because they do not understand it. Other times they will not support it because they do understand it, and it terrifies them. The enemy will use people, sometimes even those you love, to create doubt where God has given direction. And if you are not careful, you will begin to believe them. You will start shrinking your vision, lowering your expectations, settling for less than what you were created for. But God did not place a dream in you for it to be buried under the weight of someone else's insecurity. He did not give you a purpose just for it to be questioned by people who were never meant to understand it. Look at Jesus. Even in his own hometown, he was not honored for who he truly was. A prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home. Matthew 13:57. This means that some of the people you expect to support you will not. Some of the ones you love the most will be the ones who doubt you the most. And that is okay, because your purpose was never dependent on their approval. If someone in your life constantly discourages your growth, it is time to take a step back and ask yourself, is this a voice God would want me to keep in my ear? Because when God speaks, He does not sow doubt, He sows clarity, direction, and courage. They engage in toxic behaviors, gossip, manipulation, deceit that corrupt your spirit. Have you ever been in the presence of someone who speaks negatively about others, and you find yourself getting drawn into it? Have you ever witnessed manipulation disguised as care, deceit presented as wisdom, or toxicity dressed in the clothing of concern? The Bible warns us about these things for a reason. Do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, Galatians 6:7. If you surround yourself with people who engage in toxic behaviors, their ways will influence you. Many people believe they can stay pure while walking in corruption, but the truth is, what surrounds you will shape you. If you walk through fire, you will smell like smoke. If you sit in the presence of gossip, manipulation, or deceit, those behaviors will begin to take root in your spirit. Consider this: would you drink from a well you knew was poisoned? Would you knowingly consume something that you knew was tainted? Then why do we allow ourselves to ingest toxic words, deceitful actions, and harmful company? Lot's wife is a perfect example. When God was calling Lot and his family out of Sodom, he gave one clear instruction: do not look back. But her heart was still attached to a place of corruption, and because of that, she could not step fully into where God was calling her. How many of us are like Lot's wife, still looking back, still holding on to connections that keep us bound to things God has called us out of? If you are surrounded by people who lie, manipulate, gossip, or engage in behaviors that go against the heart of God, you must understand their influence will not lead you closer to Him. It will only pull you further away. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers. Psalm 1:1. Pay attention to the people you allow into your life. Do they speak words of truth, or do they twist reality to fit their desires? Do they build others up, or do they tear them down when they are not looking? Do they encourage honesty, or do they celebrate deceit? Because here is the truth: if someone will gossip to you, they will gossip about you. If someone will manipulate others, they will manipulate you. If someone thrives in toxicity, they will never be able to bring peace into your life. You cannot ask God for clarity while surrounding yourself with confusion. You cannot ask Him for peace while keeping chaos in your company. So, I ask you, what kind of voices are you entertaining? What kind of words are you allowing to settle in your spirit? Because if someone is engaging in behaviors that corrupt your soul, God is already showing you it is time to step away. God repeatedly removes them from your life, yet you keep forcing them back in. There are moments in life when God removes someone from your path, yet out of fear, attachment, or even stubbornness, you keep pulling them back. You convince yourself that it was just a misunderstanding, just a temporary separation, just a moment of distance that you can fix. But deep in your spirit, you know it wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't random. It was a divine intervention, and yet you keep resisting. But let me ask you, how many times does God have to show you that this person is not meant for you? How many warnings do you need before you finally listen? God is not a God of confusion. He does not remove people from your life without reason. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. Ecclesiastes 3:6. When He separates you from someone, He is protecting you from something you cannot yet see. Maybe it was a fallout. Maybe it was an argument. Maybe it was just a slow drifting apart that you didn't understand. But instead of accepting the separation, you went back. You reached out again. You held on, even though every time you did, things became worse. The relationship became more strained. The friendship became more exhausting. The connection became more toxic. That is not by accident. That is God trying to make something clear. Think of Pharaoh and the Israelites. God told Pharaoh through Moses to let his people go, but Pharaoh kept resisting. Again and again he refused to release what God had already decided was over. And what happened? Plague after plague came upon Egypt. Hardship followed every act of resistance. Now think of your own life. Every time you go back to someone God has removed, does it bring peace? Or does it bring more stress? Do you feel joy or do you feel drained? Do you feel uplifted or do you feel trapped? When you keep trying to hold on to what God is pulling you away from, you are not only delaying your healing, but you are inviting unnecessary pain into your life. Look at Jonah. God told him to go to Nineveh, but instead he ran in the opposite direction. He boarded a ship, trying to take matters into his own hands. And what happened? A storm came. The ship was tossed violently. The men on board panicked, unsure of why everything was going wrong, until they realized Jonah was the reason for the storm. Could it be that the turbulence in your life is because you are still holding on to someone God told you to release? Could it be that the stress, the worry, the constant heaviness is not coming from an external problem, but from your refusal to let go of someone who was never meant to stay? Pay attention. If God has removed someone from your life once, twice, or multiple times, it is not by accident. Maybe they left and came back, only for the same cycle to repeat. Maybe every time you try to fix things, something else goes wrong. That is not coincidence, that is clarity. That is God telling you, this is not for you. Sometimes the hardest thing to accept is that not everyone is meant to stay in our lives forever. There are seasonal people and there are permanent people. And if you try to hold on to someone whose season is over, you will miss what God has in store for you next. The story of Abraham and Lot is a perfect example. God had a calling on Abraham's life. He was chosen, set apart, and given a promise. But Lot was never part of that promise. Abraham brought Lot with him when he was never supposed to. And because of that, there was constant conflict, constant struggle, constant tension. Eventually, Abraham had to make a decision. He had to separate from Lot. And the moment he did, God spoke. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." Genesis 13, 14, 15. Did you catch that? After Lot left, God spoke. There are things God will not reveal to you until you release what is holding you back. There are blessings waiting for you that cannot come until you walk away from the people who are keeping you tied to the past. It might hurt. It might feel confusing. But God's plans are always greater than your understanding. And if He has removed someone from your life, there is a reason. So, I ask you, how many more signs do you need? How many more sleepless nights? How many more moments of doubt? How many more times will you go back, only to realize that nothing has changed? God is patient, but He will not force you to listen. If you keep resisting, He will let you experience the full weight of the consequences, not because He wants to hurt you, but because He needs you to wake up. So reflect. Who has God removed from your life that you keep trying to pull back in? Who has drifted away only for you to chase after them again? Who has shown you over and over again that they do not belong in your life, yet you still hold on? Let go. Let go so you can step into what God has next for you. Let go so you can finally find peace. Let go so you can stop delaying the blessings that are waiting on the other side of your obedience. Because when God removes someone, it is never to leave you empty, it is always to prepare you for something better. You experience spiritual unrest and a deep knowing that something is off. There is a language that God speaks, not through words, but through the quiet whisper of your spirit. A language that does not need explanation, does not need validation, does not need external proof, because it is felt. It is known. It is the deep, unshakable sense something is off, even when you cannot put it into words. Have you ever had that feeling? That uneasiness in your soul when you are around someone? That subtle discomfort that lingers long after they leave? That heaviness that you cannot explain, yet it follows you every time you interact with them? That is not paranoia. That is not overthinking. That is God speaking. God does not leave His children in darkness. When someone is not right for you, when their presence is harming your spirit, when their influence is pulling you away from Him, He will warn you. But the question is, are you listening? Sometimes we expect God's warnings to come as loud, dramatic revelations. We think He will send an angel, give us a dream, or part the skies with a clear command. But more often than not, His warnings come in the form of restlessness. It is that strange anxiety before you meet them. It is that lack of peace when you talk to them. It is that tension in your heart when they walk into the room. It is the way your joy feels dimmer when you are in their presence. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Colossians 3:15. This means that God's peace is supposed to be the governing force in your life. But what happens when that peace disappears? What happens when your spirit feels uneasy, no matter how much you try to justify staying in that relationship, that friendship, that environment. Pay attention. Spiritual unrest is not random. It is not meaningless. It is a signal, a divine alarm going off inside you, telling you that something is wrong. But the sad truth is, many of us ignore it. We tell ourselves it is just in our heads. We convince ourselves that we are imagining things. We push away the discomfort, pretending that if we ignore it long enough, it will go away. But it never does. Think about Saul, the first king of Israel. God's favor was once upon him, but because of his disobedience, God's spirit departed from him. And what happened next? A deep unrest filled his soul. Now the spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. 1 Samuel 16:14. Without the presence of God, Saul was filled with anxiety, fear, and an overwhelming sense of distress. He could no longer find peace. No matter what he did, he was restless. This is exactly what happens when we entertain people that God has removed from our lives. His spirit withdraws and we are left with nothing but spiritual uneasiness. You do not have to wait for a major fallout. You do not have to wait for betrayal, for a dramatic moment of hurt. Sometimes, God does not show you someone's true colors through their actions. He reveals it to you through your spirit. When Jesus sat with his disciples during the Last Supper, he already knew that Judas would betray him. The Bible says, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. John 13:21. Before Judas ever acted, Jesus already felt the weight of what was to come. Have you ever been troubled in your spirit about someone, yet ignored it? Have you ever felt the divine warning, yet talked yourself into staying? If so, you are not alone. Many of us struggle with this. We want to believe the best in people. We want to hold on to history, to memories, to the good moments. We convince ourselves that the feeling will pass, that we are being too sensitive, that maybe we are misjudging the situation. But here is the truth. God's Spirit does not lie. If your soul is restless, if your spirit is uneasy, if you cannot find peace when you are around someone, God is telling you something. Look at Samson. God had called him to be set apart, to be a man of strength and purpose. But he allowed Delilah into his life, a woman who did not love him, who did not honor God, and who ultimately led to his downfall. Do you think Samson did not feel the warnings? Do you think there were not moments when his spirit was uneasy, when something inside him told him to be careful? Yet he ignored it. He pushed past the feeling, and in the end it cost him everything. The enemy does not always send people to destroy you suddenly. Sometimes he sends them to distract you, to delay you, to drain you until you are too weak to fight back. And if you ignore the spiritual unrest, you will keep walking deeper into the trap. But God, in His mercy, always warns His children before the fall. He stirs the soul. He unsettles the heart. He removes His peace not to torment you, but to protect you. The problem is, too many of us pray for answers while ignoring the ones we have once already been given. We ask God, should I leave? Yet He has already taken away our peace. We ask God, is this person good for me? Yet we feel spiritually heavy every time we are around them. We ask God, show me a sign, while He has been showing us signs for months, even years. At some point, you have to stop asking and start obeying. God is not the author of confusion. If you are experiencing spiritual unrest, if your soul is troubled, if there is a deep knowing that something is off, listen. Because when God is speaking, ignoring Him will not make the feeling go away. It will only make the lesson harder when you finally learn it. So, take a moment and reflect. Have you been feeling uneasy around someone? Have you been restless, yet unsure why? Have you felt a growing discomfort in your spirit, no matter how much you try to suppress it? If so, do not ignore it. God does not warn without reason. And if He is making you uneasy about someone, There is something you do not yet see. Step back. Pay attention. And trust that when He removes His peace, it is always to protect something greater: your calling, your future, and most of all, your soul. You have outgrown them, and their presence is now a weight rather than a blessing. There is a painful yet necessary truth that many people struggle to accept. Not everyone is meant to go where God is taking you. Some people were part of your past, part of your journey, part of your development, but they were never meant to be part of your destiny. You may not want to hear this, but growth always comes with separation. You cannot climb higher while holding on to people who refuse to move. You cannot step into the next season of your life while dragging along those who are content staying behind. God created life to move forward. Seasons change, people evolve, purpose unfolds. And yet, many of us hold on to relationships that have already expired. We try to make space for people who no longer fit the place we are in. We try to keep them close, even when their presence has become more of a burden than a blessing. But let me ask you, are you carrying people that God never asked you to carry? Look at Abraham and Lot. Abraham was called by God to leave his homeland, to walk into the unknown, to step into the promises of God. But instead of going alone, as God instructed, he brought Lot with him. Lot was not part of Abraham's calling. He was not part of the vision. And what happened? Strife, conflict, chaos. Abraham and Lot's servants began fighting. Tension grew. The land could no longer support them both. The blessing God had for Abraham was being hindered because he was still carrying someone who was never meant to go with him. And so a decision had to be made. Separation was necessary. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company." Genesis 13:8-9. The moment Abraham and Lot separated, something incredible happened. God spoke. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." Did you catch that? After Lot left, God spoke. Some of you are waiting for God to reveal the next step. You are waiting for clarity, for breakthrough, for the next chapter of your life to unfold. But God is waiting for you to separate from what is holding you back. You cannot step into new territory while still clinging to old attachments. You cannot ask God for direction while refusing to let go of what He has already told you to leave behind. You may love them. You may have shared history with them. But if their presence has become a weight rather than a blessing, it is time to let go. Spiritual growth always leads to separation. Have you noticed how Jesus handled His relationships? He loved all, but He did not walk closely with all. He had crowds that followed Him, but He only had 12 disciples. And even within the 12, there were 3 Peter, James, and John who were closer to Him than the rest. And even within those 3, there were moments when only one was invited. When Jesus healed Jairus' daughter, He only allowed Peter, James, and John to come with Him. Mark 5:37. At the Mount of Transfiguration, where His divine nature was revealed, He only took Peter, James, and John. Matthew 17:1-2. At the Garden of Gethsemane, in His most difficult moment, He only took Peter, James, and John deeper into prayer. Matthew 26:37-38. Why? Because not everyone was ready for the higher places. Not everyone was meant to witness certain moments. Not everyone was supposed to walk that closely with Him. If Jesus, the Son of God, was selective with who He allowed into certain parts of His life, why do we think we can take everyone with us? Some people were fine for one season but are no longer aligned with where you are going. Some people were once a source of encouragement but have now become a source of heaviness. Some relationships that once gave you strength now leave you drained. That is not something to ignore. That is God showing you it is time to release what no longer serves your purpose. Are you growing or are you shrinking? Here is a question you must ask yourself. Are the people in your life causing you to grow, or are they causing you to shrink? Growth does not always feel comfortable. Sometimes it comes with tension. Sometimes it comes with outgrowing what was once familiar. Sometimes it comes with realizing that people you once relied on no longer align with the person God is shaping you to be. If you feel like you have to dim your light around someone, if you feel like you have to downplay your faith to keep them comfortable, if you feel like you have to shrink yourself just to keep the peace, then you are in the wrong environment. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? 2 Corinthians 6:14. A yoke is a device that connects two animals, ensuring that they move together in the same direction. If they are not equally matched, one will slow the other down. One will make the other's journey harder than it needs to be. The same applies to relationships. If you are spiritually growing and they are stagnant, they will hold you back. If you are pursuing God's purpose and they are chasing the world, they will pull you in the wrong direction. You may love them. You may care for them. But if their presence is making your spiritual journey harder, you must take a step back. Growth requires letting go. Think of a tree. When a tree grows, it naturally sheds dead leaves. The branches that no longer produce fruit are cut off. Why? Because growth requires release. God is calling you to something higher. He is calling you to greater faith, greater purpose, greater impact. But you cannot rise while still holding on to what is weighing you down. So ask yourself, are they adding to my life, or are they draining it? Do they challenge me to be better, or do they keep me comfortable in complacency? Do they encourage my walk with God, or do they distract me from it? If their presence is now a weight rather than a blessing, it is time to surrender that relationship to God. Because where He is taking you next, not everyone can go. There comes a moment in every journey when God whispers, "It is time to let go." A moment when He makes it clear that someone in your life is no longer meant to walk with you. A moment when the signs are no longer subtle but undeniable. And yet, many of us resist. We hold on out of fear, out of habit, out of love. We convince ourselves that we can fix what God is trying to remove. We pray for clarity while ignoring the signs He has already given us. We ask for peace while staying connected to what is causing our unrest. But let me remind you, God does not remove without reason. If He is calling you to distance yourself from someone, it is not to punish you but to protect you. It is to preserve your faith. It is to guard your heart. It is to prepare you for what is coming next. You cannot move forward while clinging to what is holding you back. You cannot receive new blessings while your hands are still full of what no longer serves you. You cannot hear God's voice clearly when you are surrounded by the noise of relationships that pull you away from Him. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Isaiah 43:18-19. God is not asking you to step away from these people because He wants to leave you empty. He is making room for something greater. And yes, it may hurt. Separation is never easy, but what is more painful, letting go now or staying attached to someone who is silently destroying your spirit? When God removes someone, it is because their chapter in your life has ended. If you force them to stay, you will suffer in a story that was never meant to continue. So listen. Pay attention to the signs. Trust the unrest. Obey the warnings. Because when you finally step away from what is holding you back, you will find that God has already prepared something far better ahead. Let go and trust Him.